Hello everyone, and welcome to the final of the Making of Franco-Belgian album series. This is alrav from Quebec, Canada, the author and creator of Alcatraz the Protector / Alcatraz le Protector. And for today's video, I'll be covering you a brief overview of the miniseries itself before I get to the special surprise. So, to put it simply, this miniseries consisted of 6 parts. It covered all the topics from the initial synopsis to the visual script breakdown process to the documentation, and then moving on to the making of a comic book page, the different inking styles that exist, and then finally a little peek at the coloring techniques that are used for Franco-Belgian creators and stuff. So with that being said, obviously as a comic creator myself, I'm not going to do any sort of review or anything because I know firsthand how difficult it is to create a whole comic book from scratch, especially if you're a one-man crew like me. It can be very challenging, so that's the reason why I'm going to be not doing any reviews, but recommendations are okay. So for people who are interested in getting into Franco-Belgian albums, or even if, as a reader, I'm going to give you 2 recommendations. So I'm going to be covering each of them briefly. So the first one I'm showing you here is an interesting example. Since most of the exposure to Franco-Belgian albums in the United States at least can be attributed to video games and stuff with adaptations, and one of the most famous examples of that would be the cult classic video game published by Ubisoft called XIII, which is actually based on a Franco-Belgian album series in France, and the video game itself is an adaptation of the first 5 tomes of this particular series. It is an example of a long-running series, and it's also the closest thing to a Franco-Belgian equivalent of James Bond. So if you're into a classic action spy thrillers and stuff like that, then it is worth checking out the book or even the game, as it is, from what I have heard, a relatively faithful adaptation of the first 5 tomes itself. So this will be a good one for those who are interested in such an old school James Bond style espionage and stuff. The other famous example that I could recommend is probably the most popular and well-known one in Europe, but less so in the United States, and that would be Asterix and Obelix. As always, the most exposure that Americans have got to this particular IP came through the video games, and there are a few examples such as all the Sega games on the Sega Master System and stuff, as well as the Game Boy Advance version of Asterix and Obelix XIII, which was developed by a 2-man team called VD Devs, I believe that's the name, and they had a reputation for making technically impressive games on the Nintendo Game Boy Advance and other systems after that. And so the Game Boy Advance version of XIII, the story itself is a basic Asterix and Obelix traveling across the territory of the Romans in order to rescue all the villagers who have been kidnapped by the Romans. This particular story is more or less loosely based on this particular album, Le Tour de Gaulle, which I'm showing you here, but it is it is completely different from the games, and it is more or less an inspiration source for what happened after that. The basic story here in this particular installment is that after the newest expector of the Roman legion made the bold mistake of sending the Romans to capture the one tiny village of Gaulois that they can't conquer, instead of trying to conquer them, which they obviously can't, they decide to simply isolate them into a lockdown, and so as a result of that, Asterix and Obelix enter a wager with the inspector himself that they will travel on a tour that's shown here briefly on this map to collect all sorts of food samples from all the different territories in order to bring them back to camp so as to put an end to the quarantine that the Roman legions have set around the Gaulois village. And so this is basically a good album to get into because it is very straightforward, and it consists a good showcase of how this series is a blend of comedy, humor and satire even, mixed in with adventure and historical building. So one thing that it does very well with the art itself that's shown here is recreate the setting of 50 years before Jesus Christ into comic book form, and it does so in a very admirable way. So it is always fun to pause and to take a good look at the various backgrounds and stuff that are densely populated and detailed and everything. So it is a very fun series and a classic one and a very long running one as well. So the original authors behind Asterix, they're long gone now. They did manage to appoint a successor, a new team, to keep the stories going, and so the series is still going strong to these days, as well as some adaptations happen, such as animated movies, cartoons, and yes, even live action one. I've seen glimpses of one when I was a kid about Asterix and Cleopatra, and this one was adapted. I think they have about 4 live action films, and they might be going to a new one as well. So that will be something interesting to look at. So with that being said, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think in the commentary section below, or if you have any suggestion and recommendation that you want to make concerning franco-belgian albums. And with that being said, look forward to art Alcatraz le Protector / Alcatraz le Protector stuff on my Substack. And with that being said, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on one another very soon. So enjoy the reading.